Welcome to your Essential Business Briefing. I'm Kate Moody. Coming up, the crunch felt around the world, why global supply chains are wearing thin, and how those disruptions will affect businesses and consumers in the months to come. Protecting cheese, olive oil, and champagne, we look at how the EU's rules on production and origin impact their sales and status. And an influencer's guide to winemaking. A French wine grower is sharing a peek into his industry on TikTok. The International Monetary Fund has downgraded its forecast for global economic growth this year from 6 to 5.9%. One of the factors at play, in addition to the unequal distribution of vaccines, the supply chain bottlenecks that have hampered international trade since the start of the pandemic. From cars to shoes, electronics to furniture, manufacturers across the board warn they're facing higher costs and slower delivery times. Most expect the supply chain problems to persist well into next year. Let's speak now to Willie Shih, professor at Harvard Business School. Thanks for being with us. Help us understand, if you would, the scale of this problem, this disruption to global supply chains.
Well, it's really massive, and you often hear the word unprecedented, but I think most people who have been in the logistics industry for some time have never seen anything quite like this. The pandemic has really disrupted not only manufacturing in locations all over the world, but it has created bottlenecks as we've seen demand shifts, demand surges with consumer spending in the United States, for example, just overloading the capacity of the Trans-Pacific and East Asia to Northern Europe trade links. So the scale of the disruption is really massive.
Now, there are a lot of different factors at play here, from a lack of raw materials to these shipping problems. Can you talk us through a little bit how we got here?
Well, we have a situation where global supply chains are really very complex. It's not unusual to have materials produced in one part of the world moved to one country where some value is added, and then it's moved on to another country. And so we have a very complex global supply chain for different products that has a high degree of interdependency. Now, in normal times before the pandemic, that relied on it made the assumption of reliable and inexpensive transport and communications, right? Really, ocean container shipping as well as air cargo. Now, what happened, we saw in the early days of the pandemic, first we had a supply shock where a lot of Chinese factories shut down, and that put a shock into the system. But then as they reopened, we had a demand shock first in Europe and then North America as well. And then that was followed by a huge surge in demand, especially as the States opened up and as Europe has opened up again. And that has created a lot of bottlenecks as people have rushed to restock inventories. And then we have these disruptions, for example, the Ever Given in Suez and congestion on the trade lanes, which has just made moving raw materials, moving parts, just extremely difficult. On top of that, then we have continuing COVID outbreaks. Most recently, it's been in Vietnam and Malaysia, as well as isolated outbreaks in China, which just have contributed to the disruption.
One of the real weak spots, if you will, in this global supply chain at the moment is microchips. The demand for semiconductors has just never been higher. We're hearing companies and governments around the world saying they're going to try to ramp up production, but probably not soon enough.
Yes, ramping up production. We have governments in Europe and the U.S. talking about we want to localize more production. Those investments, that investment cycle is going to take 2 or 3 years before you see anything. Now, the microchip shortage has been exacerbated by some of these demand shifts. So, for example, if you think back to April of 2020, auto sales in Europe dropped 80% in the month of April, right? So the automakers said, wait, I don't want as many parts. And by the time those sales started to recover and they started to think about, I need to order parts again, the capacity in those semiconductor foundries had been taken up by people who are making equipment for work from home, notebook computers, gaming systems, flat panel displays, appliances. So all of these demand shifts, and more recently what we see is a lot of manufacturers moving to what I would call a just-in-case model rather than just-in-time. In other words, they want to have a little bit more safety stock, a little bit more inventory on hand. So they've been adding additional orders, and of course, that just exacerbates the shortage situation.
Now, in the UK, we've actually been seeing shortages of fuel and food. Is the country particularly vulnerable to these sorts of disruptions because of Brexit?
Well, Brexit certainly contributed because in that case they were depending on a lot of drivers from the EU, and that reduced the number of truck drivers. That type of labor shortage, though, we're seeing all over the world, particularly across Europe, particularly in the United States as well, where we've seen competition for the people coming back to work, and the truck driving is a tough job. It's not particularly attractive, and there are better alternatives that pay more. So that driver shortage, we see that in most of the ports where I can't get truck drivers to move containers out of the ports, right? So that creates the backlog.
How about the effect of all of this on consumers? We've got the busy holiday shopping season looming.
Well, that's what's in the news these days because many of the retailers around the world, especially in Europe and the United States, are rushing to get their merchandise into stores in preparation for the holiday season. Now, that has a couple of other interesting effects because as they order more earlier, that has been contributing to the congestion. Now, I realize we're still in October, but one thing to think about is if you have merchandise that you are, say, at a toy factory in China, if you get it on a ship today, it's taking 80 days to move it across the Pacific, probably close to that, moving it to Europe as well. You're going to miss the holiday season. As far as factories are concerned, that shipping window is closing quickly. So that's why we're seeing a lot of people really going to extraordinary efforts to move merchandise now.
There are obviously a lot of different factors at play. It's a very complex issue. Is there a solution? Is there at least a light at the end of the tunnel here?
When you talk to a lot of shipping executives, they say the solution has to be when consumers stop buying quite so much. That's kind of a reflection that there is so little spare capacity out there right now. I think it will get better. It will depend on the sector that you're in. Some sectors will get better sooner than others. A lot of people are hoping for Lunar New Year of 2022 when these bottlenecks start to be reduced. Some people are saying in some sectors it could last until 2023.
All right, Willie Shih from Harvard Business School, thanks so much for joining us on People and Profit. Well, halloumi cheese has joined the hallowed ranks of food and drink covered by EU quality controls. The cheese has to be made in Cyprus and contain primarily goat's milk to be branded PDO. That's a product with protected designation of origin. Depending on the language, you might see those labels marked DOP or AOP. But cheesemakers in Cyprus are wary of these changes. They're worried the stricter regulations could dent the €300 million halloumi export market. Cole Stangler's here with more. Cole, what exactly is a protected designation of origin and how does it work?
It's one of a handful of what are known as quality schemes in the EU, all designed to promote products' uniqueness, meaning their ties to a specific place of origin and traditional know-how. But this one, the PDO, arguably the most prestigious of the bunch, covers products that have the strongest links to the place in which they're made. To get the label, every part of the food or wine's production, processing, and preparation needs to take place in a specific region and under specific conditions. For instance, 46 cheeses in France alone have this distinction. But cheesemakers in Cyprus, on the other hand, they're worried they won't be able to meet all these criteria. Basically, they're worried they won't be able to keep marketing their products as halloumi.
So does getting this label have a financial impact?
Yeah, it does. According to a study last year from the European Commission, food and drinks with geographical indications generate annual sales of 75 billion euros. About a fifth of that comes from outside the EU. Perhaps most importantly, sales value of a product with a protected name was on average double that of a similar product without the certification. In other words, consumers are willing to spend more for goods with this label.
Geographic labels can also result in legal battles.
Yeah, we've actually seen a couple related just to champagne. Last month, the European Court of Justice sided with French champagne producers who'd sued a chain of tapas bars in Spain. This just for using the word champanillo. Another battle in Russia, meanwhile, centered around a law forcing French producers to sell the champagne that they sell there as sparkling wine. The Russian word for champagne now reserved for Russian producers only. This move did trigger a 2-month-long boycott from French producers, though they've since resumed their exports there. In any case, a reminder, Kate, of just how politically sensitive this issue can be.
Cole Stangler, thanks so much for that update. Well, as we heard there, France's wine industry is fiercely protected and steeped in tradition. But one producer is breaking stereotypes by showcasing his job on TikTok. Selena Sykes has more.
Je vais vous présenter cet outil qui est très stylé, mais surtout très utile. Alors ça s'appelle un réfractomètre et ça nous permet de savoir combien il y aura d'alcool dans un jus de raisin. C'est nul ça. Et on peut calculer... Non.
Short and sweet, but also informative. Émile Caudin's TikTok videos are opening up the world of wine growing to a younger audience. With more than 450,000 followers so far, it's proving to be a big success.
One TikTok a day is good. 4 a week is fine too.
The 24-year-old wine grower's videos are watched hundreds of thousands of times. Some have even hit millions of views. From advice on aging wine to how to know when grapes are ripe, Émile covers a wide range of topics in a bid to open up what is seen as a very exclusive practice steeped in tradition.
Lots of people would like to know and understand more while drinking wine, but don't feel comfortable because it feels quite exclusive. So I'm trying to make it more accessible.
Émile started making TikTok videos during the first lockdown in France last March, when tours of vineyards ground to a halt. A social media platform where the average age of users is between 18 and 25, and winemaking may seem like worlds apart. But he's managed to bring the two together.
Émile has found the right words and tone by using language that young people use.
Émile also answers questions from his followers and promotes wine from the Loire region, all part of his TikTok introduction to the wine industry.
Well, that's all for now, but you can watch our previous shows on the France 24 website, and you can get in touch on social media with your comments and questions. Until next time, thanks for watching.